Please stand for the Gospel reading. Hear the Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Luke. Glory to you, O Lord. Jesus came down with them and stood on a level place, with a great crowd of his disciples, and a great multitude of people from all Judea, Jerusalem, and the coast of Tyre and Sidon. They had come to hear him, and to be healed of their diseases, and those who were troubled with spirits cured. And all the crowd were trying to touch him, for the power came out from him, and healed all of them. Then he looked up at his disciples and said, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who are hungry now, for you will be filled. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. Blessed are you when people hate you, and when they exclude you, revile you, and defame you, on account of the Son of Man. Rejoice on that day and leap for joy, for surely your reward is great in heaven. For that is what their ancestors did to the prophets. But woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. Woe to you who are full now, for you will be hungry. Woe to you who are laughing now, for you will mourn and weep. Woe to you when all speak well of you, for that is what their ancestors did to the false prophets." This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Please be seated. We'll see how my voice holds out, because it seems to have died just at the start of the service. Jesus didn't really like the poor. He really favoured the rich. We have a famous story when a woman was bringing perfume to Jesus to wash his feet, and people were complaining and saying the money should be given to the poor. But Jesus said, well, the poor will always be with you. If he'd been alive today, probably he'd have a private jet and a beautiful swimming pool and houses on every continent. Or maybe not. Maybe that isn't what Jesus is like. But some of his followers seem to think that it is. Are we like that as Christians? Do we think we need to be comfortable and have all these extra things to make our lives really fulfilled? Or do we follow the one who said, "Take up your cross and follow me"? I know all of us live in homes where we have clothes to spare. We have spare rooms in our house where someone could stay. We have more than we actually need. I've just spent 2,000 baht on some lovely bougainvillea plants and pots to put them in and arranged them around the garden. It looks really nice. But couldn't that money have been given to the poor? Jesus had much to say about the poor and the rich. And we've just read that in this morning's gospel reading, when he talked about blessed are the poor. Not because they were doing well at that point, but because God was going to bless them. And he has very different words for the rich, who he condemns and says, yes, you may be happy now, but in the future things will not be so good. So what about us? How do we react to this? What do we do with these words? Well, this is the person we claim to be following. Well, I don't think we're all called to take vows of poverty. Some people enter a convent or a monastery, and that's what they do. They take a vow of poverty and they give everything that they have away. But that's not the call that all of us have to follow, though it is for some. But we are called perhaps to live simply, not to live too extravagantly. But even that is quite quite relative, because what does it really mean? As many of you know, 25 years ago was when I first went to live in Egypt, and I had a beautiful apartment, but I lived there for 7 years and I didn't have any air conditioning. Because only the very rich people had air conditioning, and although I was obviously relatively well off, it didn't need air conditioning. It was hot in the summer, and so we put up with it. When I went back 7 years later and ended up living in the same building a couple of years after that, I installed air conditioning in every room other than the bathroom and the kitchen, because it really was too hot to survive without the need for that. What about us at All Saints? We've just had a wonderful few weeks of peace in our worship, because we haven't needed the air conditioners. Now, we've just switched them off now for the sermon, but it will start to get warmer and we'll be glad when they're switched back on at the end. And we've been thinking about that, and it does make our worship so much better not to have that noise. It's better for people who struggle to hear. The music sounds better. The pauses in our liturgy are more profound. It's much better to have the peace. So we've talked about putting in new expensive quiet air conditioners, which would mean we could be air conditioned and quiet. But maybe we should just sweat, turn them off and put up with it, as people did for centuries. What is extravagant and what is necessary? Of course, Jesus did say the poor will be always with you. But is that excuse for doing nothing? Clearly not. We're called to make the world a better place because Jesus went around doing the same thing. He went around healing the sick. He went around preaching good news to the poor. And we're called to follow in his footsteps. Why so often do Christians seem to do nothing? I'm still shocked by the Irish potato famine. That was 150, nearly 200 years ago now. But in the richest country in the world by far, 1 million people died of starvation. It was all one country, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. And in Ireland, 1 million citizens of the country died from starvation. And basically nothing was done about it. Now those were supposedly, and I'm sure they were, many of them very good Christian people. Why didn't they protest? Why didn't they walk in the streets? Why didn't they lobby the parliament? Why was nothing done? I think so often it's because people have a feeling of powerlessness. It just seems too big. It just seems to be the way things are and nothing can be done. So they pray, but they don't feel like there's anything practical that they can do to make a difference. In our own time, we see possible famine arising in Yemen. And yet it seems nothing can be done. It can be done, of course, because for the start they could stop fighting and bring food and deliver food. But there doesn't seem to be the will there to do that. At the same time as America is making lots of noise about an impossible invasion of Venezuela to bring humanitarian aid to the people, nothing is being done in the Yemen where where war is still continuing and weapons are still being sold. Sometimes, in the face of this, we may feel very powerless. The world is a funny place. It's a strange place. I can understand, people in a very poor country like South Sudan fighting over what they have, because they have nothing to lose and they have so little that they're desperate and food is short, and I can understand why people would descend into open warfare. And yet it still shocks me that in the 1990s, which isn't so long ago, the country of Yugoslavia was destroyed by people fighting their neighbours. People who had spent the summer on the beach on the Adriatic Sea, who spent the winter skiing in the ski resorts, who had a wonderful life, a nice apartment probably in the city, in a house in the country, people who were very comfortable, who could travel, who had a good education and a good health system and everything we could expect to have a good life, descended into the situation where they were barely surviving and fighting their neighbours. we live in many ways a very strange world. But as Christians, we have hope. We have hope that things can be changed, that things can get better. Of course, Ireland doesn't suffer from famine anymore, and the idea that they might do would be absurd, because things have improved. But it doesn't happen by accident. It happens because it can happen when people, as a whole, as a group, want it to happen. Now, I know many people feel that you shouldn't preach politics from the pulpit, and that's true. So it's not my job to say how we can make the world a better place, or how we can feed the hungry, or how we can heal the sick, or how we can raise the poor out of poverty. But it is my job to say that we should make the world a better place, that we should feed the hungry, that we should heal the sick, and that we should raise the poor from their situation. And it's up to all of us, as Christians and non-Christians alike, to work on the how to fulfill that vision. Jesus, almost beyond everything else, showed a great love for the poor. He spent time with the poor. He spent time with ordinary people. Not just the people who didn't have money, but the people who were outcasts, the people who were reviled and thought of as the least in his society. He didn't spend much time with the rich, and often when he did, he was condemning them for their hypocrisy and for all the sins that they were committing. But he was one who loved and cared for the poor. We still live in a world which is run by the rich and for the rich. And over the last 30 years, it seems to have got even worse. But we are called as God's people to be people who bless the poor. People who care for all of God's people. In fact, at the last trustee meeting last week of All Saints trustees, we decided that we want to give at least 10% of the money that comes in of the net income every year, to give that away to people who are in need, to different causes, because that's what we should be doing as Christians and as a church, is giving and sharing love with others. In doing so, we share the love of Jesus, who first loved us. Some of you may have seen on Facebook a little meme that was going around a little bit a while ago and saying something like, "Bob is smart, be like Bob." Or, "Bob always eats his greens, be like Bob." And there was always "be like" whoever the person is. But as Christians, we're called to be like Jesus. And so as we look at what he did in his life and how he lived his life, we won't be as good as Jesus, we won't be as amazing as Jesus, but we can aim to follow in the footsteps of the Son of God. So let us love, let us care, let us work for making the world a better place, and let us be like Jesus. Amen.